we move into the man of the hour, Mr. Paul Sage from ZeniMax, the creative director of The Elder Scrolls Online. Paul had a lot of involvement in the early days of Ultima Online, and obviously then that roots in with Stratics. So welcome, Paul. I'm not hearing you, bud.
All right, how about now?
Absolutely
perfect.
Okay. Well, hello. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming. Jessica will be joining you. We're running into some technical difficulties on that side, which is the first time we've run into technical difficulties today. So, welcome, and I really thank you for taking out time on your Sunday to join us. It's you've been an absolute inspiration for the industry, So I wanted to, you laugh, and I'm sure that a lot of people in the industry, when somebody says that, does laugh. But we play the games that you design, that you come up with in your brain, and then your team executes. And so I want to jump right into the questions with you. Your roots were in UO, and kind of what did you do with Ultima Online?
Wow. So very early on, I remember that I started out in QA, which is quality assurance and customer service for UO. In fact, I was in the QA department when they said, hey, we have this really cool game called Multima we want you to be a part of. And that's back when it was Multima. And so, I jumped at the chance. I got to QA the game all the way up through launch. Then worked as a GM, which is now that I think everybody calls them CSRs. And I worked on that for like about a year and a half. And then I moved into design, and kind of really got my feet wet in design with that game Star and Raph's game and Richard's. So that was kind of how I came up. I thought UO was amazing. Still one of my favorite MMOs to date. Just the freedom of it, I really enjoyed. It was just a great MMO.
It really was it was the first, actually. And we're now joined by Jessica Folsom, who is the her full title is the awesome guru of community, if I remember correctly.
That's what her LinkedIn says.
Thank
you.
So. Welcome, Jessica.
Thanks.
So, Jessica, we were just talking with Paul about his roots within the industry. Would you mind kind of just briefly running down yours?
Sure. I've been in community management starting with primarily NCSoft. I was at Nintendo before that, but NCSoft was definitely my first community management gig with Lineage 2, and I've worked at quite a few companies since then, and now have the best gig, in my opinion, with the ESO team, working with Paul and quite a few other folks from, gosh, everywhere from BioWare to Mythic. It's a really cool team.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I got some hands-on time at PAX with Elder Scrolls, and it was probably one of the coolest experiences playing the Elder Scrolls in a multiplayer experience. Elder Scrolls is one of those games that has that similar open world, do what you want to do. If you want to go hack down a tree outside of Vesper, you go and hack down a tree outside of Vesper. And so, Paul, this question is directed to you: is how do you bridge the gap between a single-player open world, I can do and go and do whatever I want, and kind of make that into a multiplayer game?
Well, I think the first thing that we wanted to do was really, and I know this sounds simple, but we really wanted to make a great RPG first. I mean, it's an Elder Scrolls game for sure, and it's an MMO, but that was the big concentration that the team had to go at, which is, is it really fun to play? So we took some of the best features from an Elder Scrolls, which are, things like kind of an engaging combat system. When you just talk about engagement in the world, you think about all the things that, you don't have a lot of UI in the world. You're actually engaged because you've got stories that make sense. You've got these NPCs that actually, they'll have funny things to say. They'll feel like they're living real lives. You have a lot of interactivity in the world. And that's kind of like the foundation of where you go. But then you have to, on top of that, layer in community features. So that provides, both opportunities and limitations. For instance, if you were allowed to go, as you said, cut down all the trees in Vesper, that are outside Vesper, then, what happens is that other person doesn't have trees. So we have to be really cautious about that. But at the same time, looking for opportunities for players to say, have a great experience together, and kind of make their own opportunities, like, going into dungeons and things like that, like bringing back in public dungeons. It seems so simple, right? This idea that you could go in someplace and you're you're in danger, and then somebody else that you don't know, a stranger, comes out of nowhere and kind of saves you. And so really getting on in those community features, like having a robust guild system, making sure that you're paired up with who you want to be paired up with, has been super important for the game. So I think there was a lot of natural overlap between the Elder Scrolls and MMOs, and we were just kind of trying to bridge that gap.
Okay, so you talk about community, and that really segues into why you're here. Stratics is a community site, and so in your experience over the past 16 years, what do fan sites really mean to that community that you're trying to develop?
I really think that they are critically important, and so I'll use Stratics as my example. Having worked on UO, one of the things about being a developer in the game is, we want to set up a game where people have something to talk about, right? But then there's got to be a place where people don't feel like they're overly watched to really express themselves. And I think that's one of the things that fan sites bring out, is they're able to actually kind of form the community over the little things that they like. So whereas we might have a global game, you might have a fan site that has several different community forums that kind of hits those micro communities. And micro communities, I actually think, are one of the best things about fan sites, because micro communities are where you start to get to know people. I mean, if you have a community that's millions and millions and millions of people, well, then you start getting lost in that sea of voices. But if you have a micro community where like 200 to 300 people, that really starts to get special, and fan sites actually allow that to happen. So I think they're critical, because that's the people that you actually want to keep getting back involved in the game with. So for us, it's a longevity thing, and I think they're great.
Well, it's always good to hear that, especially coming from the fan site perspective, because our purpose has always been to make sure that we're doing something that we're passionate about, which is playing your games, or playing games in general, and then we're helping to build that community. So it's really good to know that the developers really kind of thrive on that information. And one of my friends in the industry told me something once, and I kind of want you or Jessica, invite you also to talk about this, is if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, listen, a game doesn't make a community. The community makes the game. What's your reaction to that?
That's an interesting philosophy. I think it's right at some level. What I think is that a community just doesn't form. Like, you can't just say, I want to create a community. I saw a lot of that going on in the 2000s, where people were like, we're just going to create a community. But you have to have something for people to rally around, right? Like, so if you talk about interests like golf, fishing, sporting, or whatever, those are interests that people can wrap their heads around. And so developers actually create the interest. But what makes the game special, like if we start out with just making the game, what makes it special are the people you meet there. And that's where community is. So it's not just creating the game, it's what makes it really interesting. And so I think that's what community does, is drives that interest in.
Jessica, if you don't mind chiming in just a little bit.
Yeah, sure thing. I totally agree with Paul, and I think that a lot of times a culture will form out of an MMO where maybe a developer won't even think that it's going to go in that direction. Now, you give them kind of the basis to form the community, but just to touch on something from WoW, look at the Leroy Jenkins thing. Nobody ever could have predicted that happened, but WoW embraced it and ran with it, and it became a part of that community's culture. So I think that that's something that we're really keen to see what's going to happen, and what we can do to kind of nurture that community that's going to grow from ESO.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead, Taylor.
So you mentioned culture, and I think that even though they do develop organically in fan site communities, there are certain ways that folks in your role can encourage certain types of developments too, even though it's maybe the ecosystem is so big that it's difficult to steer that. But if you can point people in a particular direction, it makes things interesting. And one way that you've done that recently is with the emote contest I saw. And I thought, that's amazing. It hasn't even launched yet, and you're inviting players to make the game theirs. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, we had so much fun with that.
Which leads us to ask Paul if he minds replicating one of those emote contests.
I think it's safest on a Sunday afternoon for me not to try to do an emote.
Fantastic. It would have been funny. But so what if you had to pick your favorite part of the MMO industry, not the game or necessarily the title that you're working on, Paul, but the MMO industry as a whole, be it the community that builds or PvP or one of those aspects of it. What would you say is your part, or rather your favorite part of the industry?
Boy, my favorite part of the industry. Wow, Tim. I think you don't want to give a cop-out answer, but you want to be very considered. So what is the reason that we all stick to this, when we start MMOs? And I think it is a lot to do with how people react. It's a very almost visceral reaction you get when you can create something. Literally, I can start in a month if I'm working on the live side of the project. I can start 1 month, and then I will see a reaction from people within another month. And that's something that's pretty fascinating, is that quick turnaround on feedback. And so hearing the community talk about those things, talk about the features, I liked this, I didn't like this, it's kind of like the greatest high and the lowest low at some point. There's that thing I think we get, which we get addicted to, which is like, if somebody doesn't like something on an MMO, they will tell you quickly, and then that kind of hits you pretty hard. But I think at the same time, if you do something where you knock something out of the park, that feels great. And you know that your team has they've worked their asses off to put this thing out, right? Like, I'm watching people just literally are in the office, they're in on Saturday, they're on Sunday, not because we're forcing it, but actually because they want to be, because they believe in the project. And so I think when you see the community react really favorably to that, that's probably one of the best things about being in MMOs. Now, that was my answer as a developer. I have a different answer as a player.
And I think that you hit a nail on the head that I think back to when I was in high school playing Ultima Online, and there was such an emotional attachment to what I was doing in game and who I was hanging out with in game, and that developed. So you read a patch note and you go, hey, this is going to come out. Let's get together as soon as it hits and let's go and do that. And that's fantastic and wonderful, and oh my God. But then what happens if something breaks? And how does that react? And so from a developer, you said there is almost an emotional response from you when you guys work so hard on something, but it doesn't meet the expectation. How, and this may be something that you can't necessarily answer because you're still in development, but how can you be proactive when you do see those things happen? And from a community standpoint, how do you react to all that negativity, because it happens?
I think partly it's having to be in touch with your community, right? You can't kind of sit in your ivory tower, so to speak. I very often go out into the community, and of course they'll never know I'm there, but I hang out and I just watch them. So hopefully I kind of get the pulse on what's going on, to better make sure that we don't have those low points, and you kind of watch to see what they're going to say. When you do have it, what I'll say is, one of my jobs is to talk to the team and say, hey, 9 times out of 10 we'll get it right, and this one time we didn't. So let's go back, let's change it, let's fix it, and let's get the fix out there as quickly as possible. And that's there's some members of my team who haven't even been on a live project before, and so I know that they're looking forward to it, and but when that happens, and hopefully it doesn't happen very often. But when it happens, we'll just react to it and just get it changed. The whole idea is to keep people having fun, not to put anybody off.
Right on. And I know it's one of those, especially from a fan side. Wow, I can talk today. A fan site perspective, we are kind of where the epicenter happens when people see all these negative things. They may come to official forums, but they also come to fan sites and talk about it. And I know you guys are really you have your finger on the pulse of the community, and so I think that's to the credit of ZeniMax and Jess and your team about how much you guys are involved even this early in the game. So that segues into this question. One of my favorite parts about Ultima Online and the experience of single shards was events that happened in game in real time. Mm-hmm. Have you considered something like that for the Elder Scrolls, to have kind of dynamic events that are manned, so to speak? One of the things about the way we've got things set up is, having those kind of events would have to almost be global because we have our mega server technology.
you know, and I think one of the things we're trying to do right now is just launch a great game, and then kind of see what's going to be the next necessary step for us to take to keep engaging the community. It could be in-game events, and we certainly have talked about it. I mean, I'm not trying to be slippery, so to speak. I mean, obviously we've talked about in-game events, you know, things like holidays and all of that. But you know, our concentration is on making, you know, just an amazing game at the start, and then we see how it grows, and then we say, okay, that's the area we need to go hit right now.
Right, and I apologize. I know I can't have an interview with the I don't have a good answer for that, or we can't talk about that. So we've covered that base. So I wanna go to a different direction. What's your favorite memory from any game or any team that you've worked with? If you were to sit down with somebody and just talk about the industry as a whole, what would be that first memory that comes to mind for you?
So I'm going to give you two, and I hope that's okay. So the first one was Ultima Online, and so at the time I was sitting in a GM mode, and I was just watching two guys, and one guy walks by another guy, and the guy is fishing, and he says, "Any luck yet?" And the guy said, "Yep." And that was it. That was the entire conversation. But it was so very real life, and so very, you know, he actually was interested in whether he was having luck at that spot, and the guy said yes, and I was like, that was cool. That was an actual normal conversation that you'd have with somebody. And I think that's when it actually clicked for me as far as, like, this is pretty special and cool. Secondarily, probably my favorite as a player was Dark Age of Camelot. I was hanging out with some buddies at work, and we were playing, and I can't even remember. I think we were in Ime Maka, and you know, we were actually in kind of in PvE mode at the time, even though that was a PvP-enabled zone, and we were just farming monsters. And all of a sudden, we got attacked by these guys who waited until we were down and low on health, and we turned around and we whipped them pretty easily. And so, given that we were down on health and everything else, I remember that kind of adrenaline rush you get when you get into those PvP situations, and so that was a lot of fun.
So that you were that guy.
Well, we didn't go out looking for trouble, but we certainly answered in kind.
Yeah. That's awesome. Jess, what's your favorite memory, Jess?
Oh gosh, I've been sitting here thinking about this, and I have so many. Honestly, I think one of my favorite memories is back from UO, and it was actually as a gamer, because UO was my very first MMO, and I actually found out, oddly enough, that Paul was a guide on our server. But I played on Pacific, and we had a city that we ran in the hedge maze, and there was also this tavern called Green Griffin Tavern. Some people might remember it. That we had like shifts that we actually worked at, like a real job. And you had to log your hours and things like that, and you had to like wait tables, and it was this little world within a world, and everybody knew each other, and that was when I knew I needed to get into working with these communities, because they were so cool. So I think that's kind of the point that I can say that sort of changed my life and got me into MMOs, and also got me into community.
I think it's amazing that you can talk to anybody, Taylor, myself, any of the staff that we have at Stratics, or I'm sure any of the staff at ZeniMax or any game studio out there, and say, listen, what's your best experience? And it's always so unique and so different. Whereas if you ask someone that went and saw the same movie that you did, hey, what was your favorite part? They're all going to be relatively the same. Oh, I liked the car chase. Oh, I liked that explosion. But where do you have that? You know, I was spending some time walking down a street and saw somebody fishing, or we built our community, and I think that's a credit to the industry and a credit to your folks at ZeniMax, Paul and Jessica, the community that your team is building. It's an absolutely fantastic industry, and it really kind of developed what my life was going to become, Jessica. So I can really relate to that aspect. So. You know, there's so many things that the community wants to hear, and there's so many questions, obviously, that we know people want to know. But if somebody hadn't heard of the Elder Scrolls, Online, or the project rather. You know, in a couple of paragraphs, Paul, how would you sell the product or sell the game and the experience to somebody?
So if somebody hadn't heard about you know, Elder Scrolls Online, what I tell them is, you know, it is an amazing RPG first, with a great story, a great history. You know, if you haven't played Elder Scrolls, I mean, there's 20 years of history there. So you go into a world that's already has this huge background, and you know, but if you layer on that the fact that you get to play with other people for the first time in the series, you know, history, I think it starts to make it really special. But again, you know, I think the team has striven towards just a great RPG first and foremost, and something that's really immersive. You know, one of the things I don't think we talk about very often is you know, just a small layer of humor that we have in there, that gets to come out. You know, and I think it's important that people remember that the Elder Scrolls is a deep franchise as far as, you know, story and involvement goes, but the fact that it has those little bitty elements of humor are one of the things that I think is really going to pop when people play it. You know, when they get to meet Sheogorath or Mike the Liar, or even one of my favorite characters that's new, which is Stibbins. You know, I think players should really think about that.
Okay, so then that question leads to the next one. What's your favorite RPG, Paul?
Oh, wow, my favorite RPG. That's impossible, because you could ask me on any given day and I'd give you 15 different answers. I'm a huge Mass Effect fan. I just thought Mass Effect, just 1 through 3, was amazing. Probably, though, topping that slightly would be Fallout 3. And I know there's people who love Fallout 1 and Fallout 2, but Fallout 3 hit me just at the right time, and I love Fallout 3. You know, so those are great RPGs, and I'd feel remiss if I didn't also mention Bard's Tale 2, which was another one that I loved, and of course the Ultimas, but it's too hard to nail down any one.
Yeah, absolutely. So that leads to the question of, you know, obviously you have a huge background in gaming as both a player and as a developer. If you were asked to name, you know, just a couple of sources that you draw inspiration from, books, movies, and you know, I know it's one of those questions. It's really just, it's one of those you need to do a little bit of internal research for. What would you say is your top 2, you know, inspirational points?
Top 2
or bottom 2, whatever you want to. I mean, they could fall anywhere on the list.
Top 2 inspirational points. Wow. Okay, so one of the if we take media outside of games, I'm going to go with Philip K. Dick's last 3 books, which were Valis, Transmigration of Timothy Archer, and The Divine Invasion. All really good books. Love that series. But I just like the way he always kind of gravitates between that and or between sanity and insanity in those books. And then, wow, another source of inspiration. You know, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a huge fan of Star Trek. So, you know, I mean, it's one of those things. It's pretty nerdy, but I can hang in there with anybody on Star Trek trivia, I think.
It's interesting considering that the Elder Scrolls has absolutely no transporters in it.
Well, we do have way shrines, you know, but I will say one of the other things that I try to, when we talk about quest design or game design, one of those things that I really try to think about is that it's fine to be the hero who saves the world, but it's better to be the hero in somebody else's eyes. So making sure that heroism is a personal relationship, I think, is super important.
That brings an interesting question. In Elder Scrolls, can you fancy yourself the hero or the villain?
I think there are definitely choices we've left in the game, and you know, our big take is it's not villainous. They're just hard choices in life, and you know, you kind of have to live with the ones you choose. So we really always try to hit the gray areas versus the just good versus evil. And hopefully, we'll see. I think our content and writing staff have been great at developing those. So we'll see if the players hit those and feel like they have a hard time deciding which to do.
That's always exciting, is choice, and I think, we go back to the metaphor of rolling the dice, and when you roll the dice in a game, in a pen and paper game, you have those repercussions, and I like the fact that going forward with technology developing and enabling developers to really incorporate those choices into phased instances and character changes and things like that. I think it's awesome to hear that the choice is really still a vital part of any experience that you guys are developing. So, Paul, I wanted to thank you so very, very much for your time today. I know it's Sunday and you probably have a bunch of things you need to do on the Elder Scrolls and football to be watched and those kind of things. So, favorite team, football team, if you have one.
I don't watch a lot of football. I would say that but if I did have to pick one, I grew up in Dallas, so I'm going to have to go with Cowboys if I had to pick one. But
hold on, you and I are best friends. I was at a game like 2 weeks ago in Dallas. Oh my God! Hold on, now I'm a fan. So listen, no, seriously though, Paul, thank you so very much. We actually have some T-shirts that you guys are graciously donated to give away, and we actually have the names of the winners. So if let me do this again because it was so absolutely nerdy last time. We're gonna do our drum roll again, and Taylor, would you like to? No, Jesus isn't here. He left. Taylor, I'm gonna do the drum roll. Taylor, you want to announce the first three, and I'll take the last three, or Jess, you want to name them? It's up to you guys.
I will try my best.
Okay. So there we go. Hold on.
The first. Sorry, I totally blew that drum roll. Sorry about that. I'll get better, Tim. So the first on the list who will be winning a Elder Scrolls Online T-shirt is Mystic Viking. Second is Traven Kirkwall, and the third is Ben Sagra. So congratulations to you three. And Jesus.
Way more fun. I like this stuff. The last three, we have Wired172, Alex Lee 1, and The Overmind. So congratulations, everybody. And thank you so much, Paul and Jessica, for contributing those T-shirts.
You bet.
We will help people brand your game around the world.
Marketing will be walking around everywhere. So
it's okay.
Hey, they're super comfy, too.
Are they? Outstanding. Well, Jess, as the schedule lies, you'll actually be joining us here in about 15 minutes for a community chat, just to talk about kind of community and a little more derived. Paul, you're welcome to stay around and hang out with us. But thank you so very much for taking the time out and spending with us this afternoon.
Hey, Tim, thank you guys so much. Thank everybody over at Stratics for me, your community, and happy 16th to you guys. Hope you have 16 more great ones.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thanks for having us, guys.
You're welcome, Jess. Thank you so much.